And I'll get into some of the logistics here in a second about like how to apply, things like that. But any questions about the BYU experience? Yeah.
I was just going to say, as perceived by others, what schools, maybe other than a county, undergraduate, are most revered?
Yeah, good question. And I probably don't know all of them, but I know like obviously the language program. So I was in the Chinese language program, and there is some great opportunities that BYU gets access to that nobody else does because of the language diversity on campus and all the return missionaries. So the business school is one of the best in the country. The law department, if you go on to obviously advanced degrees, the law department, from what I understand, is great as well. The language department, I'm trying to think of all the different programs on campus. My wife was a teacher. She loved the education program there at BYU.
The dance department is the best in the
Yeah, the theater. Yes, so actual ballroom dance. I mean, BYU hosts the World Championship of Ballroom Dancing every year on their campus because of how well BYU is recognized. The football department's also the best. What was that?
They've been the World Championships for champions for 15 years in a row.
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope I answered. I don't know if I answered. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Because I don't know actually all of them.
Well,
So.
and part of your concept of diversity is true that you feel like in some ways it's not as diverse, but it was interesting my exposure there. If you're open to meeting and greeting lots of people,
Yep.
we actually had a nice young man from Jordan who was Islamic. He had hung out in our apartment and we heard all his stories from Jordan. So,
Yeah.
And he wasn't LDS, so
Yeah.
it was really fun.
No, that's a good point. I mean, you get a lot of diversity. It's out there. But if you were to stand on the campus and look, it would all look the same. But if you dive into the details of BYU, it's actually a very diverse cultural experience. It can be if you want to participate. Like you can participate in English buddy programs where you teach people English, and there's obviously the MTC nearby where you can go and be an investigator and hear language discussions, things like that. So there's a lot of great opportunities in Utah for diversity. Any other questions about the experience? Yeah.
Well, I guess this is more about admissions.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the UC room, they were saying they laid out some minimums. And
Mhm.
they're but none of the UC schools are accepting people to meet the minimum. They're expecting everything over the minimum.
Yep.
So, and when I graduated from high school, this would totally date me, but I knew that if I got a 24 on my ACT and I had a 3.8, I could get into BYU or Utah. Obviously not that way anymore. Can you tell me?
Yeah.
I mean, the minimum versus, do you know the minimum versus what they actually need to get to really get in?
So I talked to the folks at BYU's admissions office, and they said, look, we kind of have this computer system that does, if you hit a certain level, we kind of lop you off the bottom. And if you hit a certain level, you kind of get guaranteed admission. And it's everyone in between that we spend a lot of the time discussing should we or shouldn't we in terms of their application. They wouldn't obviously share with me what that minimum is, but I would guess if you probably aren't about a 22 or above.
Well, this year I have been informed that their average acceptance for the fall of 2012 was a 3.8 and over a 30 on
Yeah.
the ACT.
So their booklet says 28 on the
Not
ACT.
anymore. It was over a 30.
But yeah, it's only getting more and more competitive. Now, the only thing, though, that I think is important is I really do believe if you talk to the folks in the admissions, like Bob mentioned, you can make a case for yourself.
I think it's hard. I
It
think
is,
the
it
numbers
is.
are truly a bottom line.
Yeah, it is. The numbers play a huge role.
That's it.
But, like a female here earlier today asked or in the session before, well, what if your freshman grades weren't great? Do you still have a shot? And I said, if your ACT is good, you always have a shot. The ACT is a critical component to BYU's admissions process. But at the same time, if you can explain why maybe those freshman grades weren't great and how you showed improvement over time, you have a chance. Now, the other thing, though, is there's also BYU Idaho. BYU Idaho is a 24 average ACT, and my sister loved BYU Idaho. She had a great experience there. It's a smaller campus, so BYU Provo is about 30,000 students. BYU Idaho is about 7,000 or 8,000 students. 10,000 now?
15.
Oh, wow, okay.
I was there for freshman
Yep.
orientation.
Sorry, okay.
15,000.
How many? 15.
15,000.
15, that's why that was 15.
Now, the unique thing about BYU Idaho is they're on a track system. So you have essentially 3 trimesters at BYU Idaho, and you have so it's winter, summer, fall track, if I'm correct. And you get essentially put into one of those tracks. And so you don't, I believe you can make a preference of where you want to be, but ultimately they decide, if I'm correct, where you end up. Was that your experience, Katie,
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
and,
track system?
Corey just got into BYU Idaho, and they put her on a different track than Brianna, so they don't even pay attention to what the sibling schedule is or try to make it compete
Oh, really?
with Brianna's.
Okay. Now, the good thing about the track system, though, is it does allow them to admit more people, which is great. And from what I've heard is if you can make a preference, the winter, summer is the best because you get the most warm weather months in Idaho. But I don't know that. for
Do
now.
you know what curriculums at BYU Idaho really are the strengths?
I don't. I apologize. I'm not familiar with BYU Idaho as much. Anybody know?
No, what was the guarantee? I was gonna mention it and then went over it. What was the guarantee and above?
I mean, I would assume
Did they
again,
find that?
32 or above. I would think you're probably guaranteed. Yeah.
Yeah. My son had a 28, and he was nice.
And GPA?
3.8 unweighted. So unweighted means they don't take your AP courses into consideration. So if you get, so if you have a 4.35 but your unweighted is 3.7, they're going to look at the 3.7, not the 4.35.
Why wouldn't they take your
They don't
your
weigh them.
AP classes?
Because not all AP classes are treated equal, basically, is kind of the idea. So
is
they
it to your advantage to take AP classes?
It is.
It
because of
is.
College credit.
it is because of college credit, but also,
But that's
as
only
Bob
for
mentioned, they
passing
want to
tests.
see you're taking a rigorous course,
So
but you
gotta
report
get-
your unweighted GPA.
You
Yeah.
gotta get the grade
Yep.
is key, not just the test.
You got to get an A in that class.
Okay.
So, the BYU Hawaii, just quickly on that, and for those of you who've thought about it, actually, from what I understand and looking at their website, BYU Hawaii is actually as tough to get into now as BYU Provo, and it's because there's so much demand and it's just a smaller campus. Their ACT on their website said an average of a 27, I believe. So it's also gotten competitive as well. And it is actually, as I mentioned, rated the #1 most diverse campus in the country. And the other unique thing about BYU Hawaii is that you were required to pay a flight home fee before you can enroll. I thought that was kind of interesting. But quickly, two things. So their deadline is February 1st for application, but they also have a priority deadline of
No, December 1st.
December 1st. Thank you. Wow, you should be up here teaching.
I
You know,
all
you've
this
gone through this
stuff.
system.
I've been
Now,
through it.
BYU will tell you that they treat all applications equal, but they do look at early application with a little more weight, I guess, or they'll give it more time or consideration is what it sounds like. So, in general, I would always suggest that you try early application because it is a smaller pool of applicants that you're working with. So, if you know where you want to go, I would consider early application to any of those schools, whether it's BYU or not. So, BSmart.com. This is the website. This is where you go. You can find everything. Now, if you don't want to go to BYU, or maybe chances are you don't get in, or something happens, look up the Institutes of Religion that are all over the country. Every major campus will have an Institute of Religion that you can participate in, and basically that is like seminary on steroids. You go and it's a weekly course, but it's awesome, and you can connect with all the other LDS folks on campus. These are full-time seminary teachers usually at these LDS institutes, so they get paid and they commit their whole full time to teaching religion. So they're great teachers and they really know the gospel, and it can just be a really great spiritual experience for you at those institutes. So, yeah, Katie?
Also, those institute programs are transferable as religion courses
Mhm.
at BYU schools. So if you decide I'm going to go to DVC for a year or two, take care of some GE requirements, but I'm going to go to institute, you can take Book of Mormon, and it's the same exact course as you would take at
Cool.
BYU. So they use the same manual and everything.
Yeah. That is probably one other con about BYU, I have to admit. Their credits don't transfer well either way. If you go there and you want to then transfer out, it is really tough for other schools to recognize their credits. And,
All their
and
credits are just religion
most of
credits?
them,
Most.
yeah.
Really?
And
All
then,
their credits don't
yeah, Katie?
transfer
That's
well?
across the board for all universities.
Is it?
Transferring from university to university, because every course that they offer is slightly different than another
Yeah.
university might offer. And so, you know, I, just from experience, my sister-in-law transferred from the University of Frankfurt, didn't get any credits transferred.
Yeah.
So,
And when you transfer within a system, so like the California Community College system, if you're going to go from a community college to a CSU, they all use fairly similar curriculum, so those will transfer. But when you try to go outside of the system, it does get tough. So yeah,
So say you are slightly lower than the number 30 to get in, how likely are they to take like a DVC transfer student? Is that a pretty high rate or?
Yeah, the transfer
is easier.
transfer is easier. My brother just got admitted as a transfer student. You've got to do well. I mean, you've got to have a high GPA at that transfer at that school. But if you get in and really commit yourself, yeah, I think you have to have 30 credit hours, at which point you can apply, and they do accept a high level of transfer. And that's part of I think BYU's whole thing is, you go to school, you go on a mission, you come home. There's a certain more maturity level that you probably have at that point, and so they're willing to take a risk on you if you didn't have the great, SATs, ACTs, or GPA. And in the book that you have there, hopefully everyone got one. There is sort of a breakdown too of where they put their emphasis in terms of grades versus other categories. Seminary attendance is a very important thing as well. So make sure you go to seminary. There's one. I think there's just one left, so take it. I'm so sorry, guys. I asked for more, and this is what they gave me. But just in time, any other questions? But I think you're welcome to go grab refreshments if you're ready for that. But any other questions? Or?
Okay, I actually have a lot of questions. I don't know if they'll apply to everyone. But my first question, since we were talking about seminary, I'm a convert and if go to seminary my freshman year. Will that be
No.
No. Okay. And another question, for SAT subject tests, are they important for BYU?
From what I understand, again, the ACT is most important for BYU.
But what's the average ACT score, do you know?
We're going to say a 30 based on
30
recent applicants. So a 30 or above is sort of you're a better shot at getting in if you have a 30 or so. But I want to emphasize, don't not apply. Like, it's $50, right? I mean, I know that's money, but like, why not? And again, if you've got a powerful essay and if you've got, you may get told no, but I don't know. I guess my feeling is what's the worst that could happen? So I would say don't count yourself out. Give it a shot. All right, thank you, everybody. Go Cougars.